بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. When you study the history of Islamic scholarship and early Muslim societies in the formative periods, we're talking about Asr al-Nubuwah, Asr al-Sahaba, the Tabi'een, so the first few generations, which are the golden generations. One of the things you find is there were no disabled Muslims. So in this early period, there really were no disabled Muslims. And I stand by that claim. At the same time, you did have Muslims, however, you did have Muslims that happened to have some disabilities. So there's a difference. In the modern age, we like to create labels and identities. We put everything in a box, and everyone is put in a neat category or box, and then they become labeled by that. And there are people that are proud of some of these identities, but don't ever look at Muslims or look in the history of Islam to find Muslims that are disabled, because you'll fail, you'll fall short. There really are no individuals like that. And I'll start with a case study to show you what I mean. If you look at early Islam and look at the leadership positions in every level, some of the things you find are remarkable. So I want to start with looking at the life of one particular individual, a great teacher. Now, I'm not going to look at the time of the Prophet or the time of the companions, because there are many examples there. But if I use those examples, perhaps some of you might say, well, that was the Prophet ﷺ, or those are the companions. We have this image of the companions as someone or people that were great, and they were truly great, but we try to distance them from ourselves. So let's look beyond this first generation, generation one, to look at how Muslims were in early history, just to give you an idea what were their standing and what some of the issues they dealt with from this particular perspective. So this person I want to talk about was a great Islamic teacher. He was an Islamic scholar and a leader and teacher. So I'll tell you his name towards the end, but let me tell you about his stance and his position in Islamic society at that time. He was so knowledgeable that they gave him a title that he was probably the first one to get that title, or one of the first. When someone's knowledgeable in Quran, they call him Qari. In Hadith, Muhaddith. In Fiqh, Faqih or something like that. When someone's scholarship is so overwhelming that it touches on everything, you can't really label him with one particular field, then sometimes they start using the term Shaykhul Islam, the Shaykh of Islam itself. So this particular teacher, he was probably the first one in our history that had the title Shaykhul Islam because of his standing in Islamic scholarship and knowledge. Not only that, he was from Mecca. So he was so knowledgeable that the people of Mecca, when they had questions, he was the one they turned to. So another title he earned was Mufti ul-Haram. He was the Mufti. He was the one who issued fatwa in the Haram of Allah Azza wa Jal, in the sacred mosque, Masjid al-Haram. So he was the Mufti. And everyone knew that. And no one dared ask anyone else for a question. When people came for the Hajj season, when people came from outside, they were foreigners, they probably didn't know the local scene. So the authorities, they would come and they would announce in the audience or in the masjid, La yuftin nas illa huwa. No one should give fatwa except this particular person. Everyone knew he was the one to turn to for questions and ask their legal problems. Even to the point, a Sahabi, Abdullah ibn Abbas, we talked about him today at some length. Abdullah ibn Abbas, in Medina, people would write to him. One of the instances, someone wrote him a letter asking a question, and that person happened to be in Mecca. It was a woman. So she sent a letter to Ibn Abbas from Mecca, and he sent the response, Ya ahla Makkah, tajtami'una ilayya wa fikum fulan. O people of Mecca, you ask me for questions when you have this person in your midst. He wasn't Sahabi. He was from the generation after the Sahabi, but he was so overwhelming in his scholarship and his standing that even the companions recognized his worth. So he was Mufti al-Haram, he was Shaykh al-Islam. Just to give you two illustrations of his standing with the political rulers of his time. So in his time, there was a ruler, Abdul Malik ibn Marwan. He was the Khalifa of the Muslims. So he came to Hajj one time, and even he knew who he was. Even the rulers, they knew his stance and his position. So he came to Hajj, and he's sitting on his kursi, the throne, so to speak, with his officials around him, and Ata happens to pass by. When he saw him, he immediately stood up, and he asked him to come close, and he made him sit by his side, and he said, "Ma hajatuk?" He asked him, "Do you have anything, any needs, anything I can do for you?" The Khalifa of the Muslims is asking this teacher, "What can I do for you? What are your needs? How can I help you?" So what did he say to him? He said, "Ittaqullah." He said, "Fear Allah." And he started advising him, "Ittaqillaha fi haramillah wa harami rasulihi." Fear Allah about this haram that you're in. Fear Allah about the haram of Medina. Fear Allah about your subjects. He kept going on and off, mentioning specific tribes and mentioning the children of the companions and the Ansar and the Muhajirin. When he was done, the ruler, he said to him, "These are all other people's needs. What about you? Ma hajatuk? What can I do for you?" And he said to him, "Look, mali fi makhluqin hajatuk. There is no need for me with any of the creation. There's nothing you can do for me." And he stood up and he walked away. And when he walked away, Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, the Khalifa of the Muslims, he said, "Hada huwa sharaf, hada huwa su'dud." This is nobility. This is real leadership. So the leader, the Khalifa, the Imam of all the Muslims is saying this about this particular teacher. Another instance or another example, illustration of his stance with other great scholars of his time. This is an example from Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, the great Imam. No one knows an introduction to Abu Hanifa. So Abu Hanifa, he was from Kufa. He's not from Makkah or Medina, so he comes for Hajj. So there is an interesting story when he does the Umrah. Abu Hanifa is, what do you do at the end of Umrah? To get out of your ihram, what do you have to do? You shave. So Abu Hanifa is sitting with the barber. So he's sitting in the barber shop, and he's getting his hair cut. And he asked him how much. That's what all of us would do. So the barber said, "Don't you know? One doesn't ask about money, about the rights of Hajj." So Abu Hanifa became quiet. And then the barber's cutting his hair, and Abu Hanifa, he's quiet. And after a while he says, "Don't you know? This is the Hajj season. Never remain silent. Make dhikr of Allah Azza wa Jal. Say istighfar, say labbaik." So then Abu Hanifa started doing that. When he was finished with his haircut, Abu Hanifa got up to leave. And he said, "Go and make 2 rak'ahs. Don't you know? You just completed the manasik of Umrah. Now make 2 units of prayer." Abu Hanifa said to him, "Wait a minute. Where do you get all this information from?" He was impressed. Abu Hanifa, he's a great scholar from Kufa. So he's impressed. He said, "Where did you get this information from? Where did you learn all of this from?" And the barber, he said, "From this teacher of Makkah," and he mentioned his name. And Abu Hanifa, he said, he realized, he wanted to learn from him. So he went to him in Makkah, in the masjid, and he recognized that he was coming from far away, and he asked him, "Where are you from?" So teachers in those times, they recognized their students, and they would often talk to them. There would be conversations. So he said, "Where are you from?" He said, "I'm from Kufa." Kufa in those times it had a very bad reputation because that's where all the sects came from. That's where, all the different Muslim groups came out of. That's where even there were non-Muslim groups operating. So people coming from Kufa, everyone else was kind of wary of them. So he asked him, this is their first meeting. He asked Abu Hanifa, "From which group do you belong? Which group do you belong to?" So you're coming from Kufa, but from which group? So Abu Hanifa is a clever man, and he knows what's going on. He knows that the prominent groups of the time were people like the Khawarij and the others. So he said to him, "I'm from the group that does not insult the companions. I am from the group that believes in Allah's destiny. And I am from the group that does not excommunicate any Muslim because of a sin." So he knew what were the prominent groups and the positions they had, and he answered in this way. And Ata, or the scholar, he was so impressed. And he said, you know what, sit next to me. And he began to teach him. And he spent some time learning from him. Abu Hanifa, he said about him, ما لقيت مما لقيت أفضل من عطاء ibn Abi Rabah. Abu Hanifa, he said, I have not met anyone from all the people I've met in my life better than Ata ibn Abi Rabah. And that is a great teacher we're talking about. Ata ibn Abi Rabah is a great scholar. He was a student of Ibn Abbas, and Ibn Abbas was a student of his. He was a student of Aisha. So many great scholars were his students, like Abu Hanifa, Imam al-Zuhri, Imam Qatada. Qatada said about him, there are 4 people in my life. If I know that these 4 people agree on something, I will never have an opinion on that. And he mentioned Ata ibn Abi Rabah. He mentioned some other great imams like he mentioned Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib, Hassan al-Basri, great names. And so Ata had such a great standing. He was a vessel of knowledge. So what does that have to do with our talk? This is what we know about him. How many of you know about his disabilities? Very few people know about him. Why? Because there were no disabled Muslims. There were Muslims that had issues. They may have some disabilities in some aspects of their life, but they were leaders. There were people like Ata. But there's a description of his in the biographies that's very unique description. It's a description I've never seen about anyone else. It's one of the most unflattering descriptions, but it's not the beginning of the biography. The biography talks about everything we talked about. But in biographies, generally scholars, they try to physically describe the people, you know, their complexion and things like that, and some of the things about them. And it's an incidental description. It's not a value-driven description. So the description of Ata is so unique, it's so unflattering that, you know, it's hard to memorize. I'll read it to you. كان عطاء أسود أعور أفطس أشل أعرج ثم عمي. He had everything. So if you know Arabic, some of these terms are classical Arabic. So what are they? First, كان أسود. What is Aswad? He was black. And his son Uthman, he said, كان أسود شديد السواد. He was not just black, he was intensely black. And then the other description, aftas. Aftas means flat-nosed. So this is just incidental descriptions. So he was African. His father was Nubian. So he was an African, a descendant of an African father. And look at his position in Mecca in the time of the Sahaba, radiyallahu anhum ajma'in. So this is very, very interesting. This shows what early Muslim society did. Even today, in modern civilization and all the country, we're struggling to accommodate people of different races. We're struggling to accommodate people of disabilities. And if you look at early Islam, the way, how natural it was, how seamless it was, is incredible. So that's 2 descriptions. Now coming to the disabilities, what are some of the other descriptions? A'war. A'war in Arabic means having one eye. So a'war means you have a problem, a disease, and you can't see out of one eye. So you can only see out of one eye. And then the end of the description, thumma amiya. Later on, he lost the use of the other eye and became fully blind. So he had a visual impairment, and in the end of his life, he was fully blind, a'war. Not only that, ashal. Ashal is where you have lost the use of one of your arms. So he had one eye and only one functioning arm. How did he lose it? He was fighting alongside Abdullah ibn Zubayr, the great companion, when he was struggling against injustice. And in the battles, he lost, you know, one of his arms. He lost the use of one of his arms from the battle wounds. So he was a'war, he was ashal, and then a'raj. The last one, a'raj. A'raj means only one of his legs worked. So he walked with a limp. A'raj means you walk with a limp. So look at the description. One eye, one functioning eye, and then later none, one functioning hand, one functioning leg. So this is an individual who probably combined all of the disabilities we could think of. It's incredible that this was his description, and look at his standing. How many of you knew that? Most of you don't know that about him because it didn't define him. That wasn't his identity. And I think it's disrespectful to say Ata was a disabled Muslim, or to look at our history to try to find examples of disabled Muslims. That's not who they were. Who was he? He was Shaykh al-Islam. He was Mufti al-Haram. So that's something, a lesson we can take in our lives. Don't label people. Don't let your weaknesses or your disability define you, or anything define you. The only label, the only thing that should define you should be your faith. We are Muslims. So our accomplishments should define us. So this is an incredible story. And if you look at his biographical entry in Siyar A'lam al-Nubala, Imam al-Dhahabi has the best biographical work of early scholars. It's pages and pages of his description. And this, where we're talking about the disability, one line. There's pages and pages about him, his teachers, and his accomplishments, one line about his disabilities. And that's really how we should approach the topic of disabilities. So let's look at some other examples, and we'll close with that. I don't want to look at anyone else in detail, but let's look at leadership positions. There's so many examples, so many famous names that you may know, but you probably don't know that had some issues that they dealt with. But I just want to look at the top tier leadership positions. So in hadith, for instance, the most prolific narrator of hadith is who? Which Sahabi is the largest narrator of hadith? Anyone? Abu Huraira, radiyallahu anhu. Abu Huraira has the largest number of hadith. So there's a discussion about what is the strongest chains of hadith, which are the strongest chains of hadith, who are the strongest scholars of hadith. So the strongest student of Abu Huraira was someone by the name of Al-A'raj. And his strongest student was Abu Zinad. So one of the strongest isnads in hadith, and you'll find in Sahih al-Bukhari so many examples of this isnad. From Abu Zinad, from A'raj, from Abu Huraira. And A'raj, what did I say about that? It means the one who limped. So Al-A'raj, his name was Abdul Rahman ibn Hurmuz. He was a great scholar, one of the strongest students of Abu Huraira, but he had a disability where he walked with a limp. One of his legs didn't work properly. So the strongest, or the most prolific narrator of hadith, one of the strongest chains, we have someone who had this disability. Is that what defined him? The reason that name is used because in hadith chains, isnad, sometimes there's so many names in order to identify. If they use Abdul Rahman from Abu Huraira, there are probably 100 students of Abu Huraira named Abdul Rahman. So just it's a coincidental thing they use Al-A'raj just to identify him so people knew who he was. Now, just a quick tidbit about his life. He had a disability, but anyone know how he died? He died fighting jihad in Alexandria, Egypt. So even despite having this disability, it didn't stop him. He wasn't a disabled Muslim. He participated in everything that Muslims participated in, and he gave his life in a physical battle for Islam. Rahimahullah ta'ala. That's hadith. In this generation after, so in generation 2, the generation after the companions, there were 6 scholars who were known as Mudarul Hadith. There were 6 scholars, all the isnads of hadith pretty much went through them. So they were the major vessels of teaching hadith. So these are the great scholars of every single city. So 2 of them were blind. 2 of the 6 Madar al-Hadith, the greatest scholars, they were blind. One of them, and I'll mention one of them, Al-Qasim ibn Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr as-Siddiq, radiyallahu anhu. So his name was Al-Qasim. He was the grandson of Abu Bakr. He was the grandson of Abu Bakr. He was a nephew of Aisha, radiyallahu anha. So he was one of the strongest students of Aisha, radiyallahu anha, al-Mu'mineen. So the fiqh of Aisha, radiyallahu anha, the hadith of Aisha, is contained by a number of people. One of them is Al-Qasim, her nephew, Al-Qasim ibn Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr. So he was Madar al-Hadith. He's also one of the 7 fuqaha of Medina. So in fiqh, you had 7 teachers that were the premier people of fiqh in Medina. If you had questions in Medina in this lifetime, there were 7 people they turned to. So one of them was Al-Qasim ibn Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr, who we talked about. And another one was Abu Bakr ibn Abdul Rahman ibn al-Harith. Both of them were blind. So this was so incredible. Umar bin Abdul Aziz, the Khalifa, he said about Al-Qasim, he said, if I had authority in the matter, I would make the Khalifa the blind man of Banu Taym. And he was talking about Al-Qasim. So this, imagine the Khalifa, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, the great Khalifa, he said, he expressed his desire to appoint Al-Qasim as the Imam of all the Muslims despite him being blind. So this shows you their stand. These are the fuqaha of Medina. The Madar al-Hadith, the 6 Madar al-Hadith, there are 2 of them also that were blind. One of them was Qatada, and one of them was Abu Ishaq al-Sabiri. Qatada was a great scholar as well, and he was so knowledgeable that most people came to study hadith from him. He took hadith from Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib, who was the son-in-law of Abu Huraira in Medina. So he came to Medina, and he was from Kufa. He came to Medina to study, and he learned all the hadith that he had in 4 days. And Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib, he put his hand on his chest and he said, "Leave me, O blind one. You took all my hadith and you didn't leave any for me." So in 4 days, he learned all the hadith of Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib, who was married to the daughter of Abu Huraira, and he was blind. So this is an example of what positions, leadership positions that Muslims attain despite their disabilities. And finally, in Quran, all of us are reciting Quran. Shaykh Al Abdul Rahman recited by Riwayat Hafs and Asim. The way we recite Quran today, Imam Asim, is Qira'at Asim. There are many different ways of reciting Quran, but the dominant way is Qira'at Asim. And Asim, his teacher was Abu Abdurrahman al-Sulami, who was a student of Uthman ibn Affan. Abu Abdurrahman al-Sulami was blind. So the way we recite Quran today goes back to the teaching of someone who is blind. So this is an incredible story of not disabled Muslims. We did not have disabled Muslims, but we had Muslims that were challenged in some fields. So this is how we should look at it, and I'll conclude with that. We should look at this issue in this way. We recited the Surah Ar-Rahman, that we listened to this recitation, beautiful surah. What's the recurrent theme in the surah? The favors of Allah. فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ. Which of the blessings and favors of Allah do you deny? So we need to look at our lives. All of us were given a range of blessings, and we have some challenges. So some of the things Allah tests us with, but at the same time we enjoy so many blessings. Are you going to highlight your disabilities or things that you don't have, or are you going to highlight your abilities? So if you look at any of these individuals that we talked about, and there were many more examples of individuals who are blind, who are crippled, who didn't have use of their arms or their legs in Muslim history, you can never define them as disabled Muslim. Rather, they had so many abilities, and because of their abilities, we're still talking about them today. Our understanding, our practice of deen goes back to them. So this is a great, great inspiring story. We should all be inspired by that. Let's not label each other. Let's be grateful to Allah Azza wa Jal for all the abilities that we enjoy, all the favors that we enjoy. And the few things that we don't have, Allah didn't give us everything. Life is meant to be challenging. It's a test from Allah Azza wa Jal. But it's a test to see if you're grateful for everything that you have, or you're still going to do something with that and leave your mark on the world and achieve your purpose, which is getting closer to Allah Azza wa Jal. Or are you going to highlight the things that you don't have and live a life of regret and negative emotion? We ask Allah to bless all of us. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم